Pleasure. Hey, thanks for turning me onto those shoes you wear too. Those Ultras.
Oh, nice.
I started running with those.
Yeah.
I like them. I like them a lot. They're great.
Which ones you got? The Lone Peak RSMs, I think?
I've got the whatever the trail ones are.
Okay.
You know, I like the wide foot. What's it called? Foot box. Is that what you
Foot-shaped
call it?
toe box, yeah.
Yeah, toe box. Is that what's called? Toe box. Yeah, those are great.
Cool, man. No, I'm glad you like them.
And I feel like this is what you wear, so it gets me excited when I'm running.
You know, it's really interesting, like when you dive into kind of the world of footwear and stuff. And I learned this recently, and the number one indicator of low injury risk, which is what runners are always looking for, they're trying to minimize risk. So comfort is the identifier for that. So if you find yourself going into like a specialty running shop, ask them to try on a variety of different pairs, a variety of different models, and find the one that's most comfortable for you, and that's probably going to lower your risk to the lowest you can get from your footwear anyway.
What if you like really smushy ones? Aren't those supposed to be not so good for you?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think it's one of those things where it's kind of half true, half not, where you kind of have to look at what's the purpose of what you're doing. So the way I kind of describe it is, if I'm trying to strengthen my lower legs, I want that low cushion, that firm platform, because that's going to really activate the muscles in the lower part of the leg. But if I'm dealing with some lower leg issues or a little sore, I did a workout and my calves are kind of sore, my ankle's sore, then cushion can be great because it's going to relieve that kind of initial impact on the lower part of your legs. And the caveat, though, is those impact forces have to go somewhere. So they're kind of going to move further up the kinetic chain. So what I usually tell people, if you're dealing with lower leg pain or injury, then you might want to consider something a little more cushioned. And if you're dealing with something like in your knees or your hips, then getting rid of some of that cushion is going to just keep that kind of more precise foot plant and maybe alleviate some of those impact forces from ending up in those areas. But at the end of the day, the mechanics of it all are going to be the real driver. You want your foot to come underneath a bent knee, because you're using your legs as kind of like a 3-foot spring, essentially. So if you can get that foot plant under bent knee, it's going to absorb it in the way your body intends versus absorbing it in a way that could maybe send those impact forces into the wrong areas.
That's really interesting. You know, I was watching a video with this guy who was in his 70s who runs an under 3-hour marathon.
Yeah.
And he said that 5 years ago he hired a coach. Which is kind of crazy, like a 65-year-old dude hiring a coach, but trimmed a bunch of time off of his marathon. I think more than 5 minutes off of his marathon. I think it was quite a bit more than 5 minutes. And, he was running for a long time before that, but yet a coach sort of shortened his time in finishing a 26-mile race at 70 years old.
Yeah, it's never too late.
Yeah. The bent knee is really important because a lot of folks who don't pay attention to the history of footwear don't understand that this fat cushioned heel that everybody sort of thinks of when you think of a running shoe, and when you watch a lot of people run that don't know any better, they run and they land on their heel, which is sort of something that was created. Was it by Nike? Is that what it was that created that fat bottomed heel thing?
Yeah, I think they were the first one to do the offset, where it was traditionally, I think it was like 12 millimeters, where your heel would be that much higher than your forefoot. But I think even when we get into kind of like, say, heel striking versus forefoot or midfoot striking, heel striking is another thing where it's not inherently bad. It all comes down to what I was saying before, where if you can heel strike but your foot is still underneath that bent knee, you're probably not going to do anything too detrimental. So, but
it's not optimal, right?
It probably depends on the specific runner and their particular gait. Yeah,
so you could have like extra long legs or something, and maybe heel strike would work, or extra short legs, or what would it be?
Yeah, I don't know for sure if there's like a height thing that would do it. I think it would maybe just come with like the mechanics of the way the person learned to run in the first place, and just maybe some nuances with the way their body is kind of more or less designed. But I mean, there's heel striking folks that are not injury prone or have never gotten injuries or hardly ever get injuries. But usually, I think if you're doing that, that's probably because you're under that bent knee and you're not kind of having that point where your foot is out in front of your knee, and then you kind of have that straight leg but at an angle where it's going to be, not ideal for kind of absorbing those impacts.
Yeah, that's the real bad one, right, is when people are pigeon-toed, when their knees kind of bend in, which I do see quite a bit. That's got to be terrible for your knees, right?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't say for sure, but I think there's a lot of nuance, and it ends up being kind of like an individual situation with a lot of these cases. So it's hard to know for sure. There's probably people who can talk to mechanics better than me, and
right. You just run. Explain the record you broke. You ran 24 in less. Well, it was 100 miles, and it's a 24-hour time period. But you did it in 11 hours and 40 what minutes?
Yeah, so it was, I'll explain a little bit there. So it was, the event itself was called 6 Days in the Dome. And really what it was you could do anything from a 24-hour event to a 48-hour event to a 6-day event and just see how far you could run within that time frame.
6 days.
Yeah, I know there's some crazy people out there. So just wait till David Goggins finds that event. And then but yeah, so I've been, it's interesting because there's not a lot of timed events that are necessarily structured for 100-mile or for like 12 hours. So a lot of times you find yourself jumping into some of these other events that are longer in duration and just kind of using them as a way to try to run a fast 100-miler or a fast 12-hour. So the race director for that particular event had reached out to me because he's known me for a while and knew that I was targeting fast 100-mile times, and just said, hey, I've got this cool event set up at the Olympic Training Facility in Milwaukee, Wisconsin at the Pettit Center, and I think it's going to be pretty conducive for fast times, and asked if I wanted to do it. So I actually didn't have an ideal timeline that I would have normally wanted to work with in terms of getting ready for it, but training went really well, and I went there targeting the 100-mile world record, which was 11 hours, 28 minutes and 3 seconds prior to that, and ended up running 11 hours, 19 minutes and 13 seconds for 100 miles. And then since we have like this 100-mile distance and also this 12-hour timed event kind of structure, you can find yourself, if you're under 12 hours, kind of double dipping and getting 2 events for the price of 1, I guess you could say. So I kept running after I hit 100 miles and ended up going 104.88 miles total in the 12-hour time frame.
So that was another record?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's 2 world records, 100 miles in 12 hours.
Dude, 6 minutes and 48 seconds for a pace for 100 miles is fucking bonkers. That is so fast. That's so crazy. That's such a fast pace, man.
Yeah, it's funny, like when you look at it, because I think sometimes people look at like 100 miles in 11 hours and 19 minutes, and there's not a lot of context in their mind unless they're kind of familiar with ultramarathon running. Mm-hmm. But when you start to break it down into like the subcategories where it's like, well, that's like 4 like sub 3-hour marathons in a row, or I can't remember how many or what the 5K time is. There's like, it's like 31 5Ks at some time.
That's 4 sub 3-hour marathons in a row.
Yeah.
Wow. That's so crazy. That's so fast. And are you still eating mostly meat?
So, this gets brought up quite a bit, I think, because, I eat a ton of animal products for sure. But I wouldn't classify myself as a quote-unquote carnivore or quite in that.
Well, this is because the carnivore diet people want to claim you.
Right.
And
yeah.
we discussed this kind of the last time you were here, where you take in a lot of glucose and you ramp up your carbohydrates considerably before a race. Mm-hmm. But like, what is a daily diet? Let's say in training, like you're preparing for something like this. What's a daily diet for you like?
Yeah. So, let's jump into that. I think there is some nuance within that even, because when you think of my lifestyle, the way I like to describe it is if you took a calendar year and you grabbed a single day out of there and you grabbed a day where I was at like a peak training day versus a recovery day, those are like so drastically different in terms of my energy and my energy demands. So like things tend to fluctuate quite a bit and change quite a bit. And I think that's oftentimes what confuses people, because they look at what I'm doing, say, on race day, or they look at what I'm doing on one of my big workout days or my rest day and think that's what I'm doing across the board. So when you get the folks saying, oh, well, Zach follows a carnivore diet, they're probably looking at like a post-race recovery day where then I might be eating almost all just animal products, a lot of eggs, a lot of salmon, red meat, that sort of stuff. But if you pick a day out where I'm doing like a big training day, doing like a 30-mile run or something like that, that's where I'm going to kind of bring back some of the carbohydrates to try to supplement that activity. And the best way to maybe describe it is, there's like this like kind of train low, race high, or this carb periodization concept that's getting more momentum behind it, and more studies and science behind it too. There's some interesting folks that are looking into this in more detail. And if folks are really interested in doing a deep dive in it, there's a guy named Dr. Mark Bubbs. He wrote a book called Peak. And he kind of dives into kind of like some of nutrition science, where it's been and kind of where it's kind of heading, and they highlight some of that. And one of the big things they're starting to recognize that even with elite athletes, when you're periodizing your training like I do, your nutrition should be being periodized as well. The science is pretty clear that like if you're doing a workout and you take in glucose or fructose, I think most science says a 2-to-1 ratio is ideal for maximizing the amount you can take in. Then you're going to give yourself an advantage. That's like rocket fuel. So then it becomes a question of like, do you need that 100% of the time, or do you even want to do it 100% of the time? Because when we look at elite,
can I pause you right here?
Yeah.
When you say glucose 2-to-1, like what do you mean by that? And
glucose to fructose.
Okay.
Because what they found out is when they started doing a lot of like the exercise science and nutrition was that the real limiter is your gut. So like on paper,
so absorption.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a finite amount you can absorb, and you increase the amount you can absorb on average if you have that 2-to-1 ratio versus all of one or the other.
So 2 glucose to 1 sucrose.
Yeah.
Interesting. And now, what are the different sources for glucose versus sucrose? Like sucrose is simple sugar that you get. Is that more like a refined sugar?
Yeah. I think like the way like most like sports supplements and things like that are going to be designed to kind of meet those specific, because they're looking at the literature and they're seeing like, okay, this is how you optimize.
So like
it.
a Powerade or a Gatorade or something like that would be a 2-to-1.
Yeah, I'd have to look to see exactly if they have that, but my guess would be they would be if they're looking at the research and where that's kind of at. But yeah, so like really the question that I think needs to be asked with a lot of this stuff is like, if I want to make a workout feel as easy as possible, if I can get in like say 60 grams of carbohydrate per hour, it's probably going to do that. Like my perceived effort at that pace is probably going to feel easier. But then you have to ask the question, like, how often do you need it to feel that easy? So for me, the answer to that is like, well, if I'm doing something really strenuous or something that's in a little bit of a gray area where it's just fast enough to dip into the glycogen stores, but just slow enough that I can do it for quite a while, like maybe even a couple hours, then you're kind of in this area where that could be an advantage for me from a performance standpoint. But if I'm going out for an easy run of like 60 to 90 minutes and it's going to be like a 2 to 3 out of 10 perceived effort anyway, like there's no real need for me to be hitting glucose during that or, sports drink during that to make that feel even easier yet. Because my goal isn't necessarily to make an easy run feel even easier, I guess is the way to
It's
maybe
hilarious
describe
that you
it.
call a 90-minute run easy. That was nothing, just a stroll, just a few dozen miles.
Well, and I think that also brings up a really good point too, where like a lot of this stuff when we're looking at carbohydrate usage and performance is we're looking at elite athletes. We're looking at folks that are training for like, the Olympics. Sometimes they're even Olympic medalists. And that's just not a very good comparison, I think, to the average person who's out there running because, they're angry.
Consciousness. Half of you sped up, the other half is fucked up. So it's just seesaw battle retardation where you're too stupid to be making your own decisions. Fucking ridiculous, man.